The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept it, and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day of this 7-day session here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in April 2021. And yesterday I spoke of the sayings, the specific saying of Chinul, the Korean Sun master from the 12th century, whose expression traced down the radiance to its source is a deep instruction for practice. Let me share a little, some alternative readings of that he spoke of it over many years. And so in various different forms. Trace back and observe the qualities and function of your own mind. That's where we start. Trace back and observe the qualities and functions of your own mind. That is, as an impartial observer, become aware of what's going on in your own mind. The sensations in your body, the thoughts flitting through, the emotions, the perceptions, the misperceptions, whatever is going on. Treat it as if you were a reporter for the first time exploring the human condition, that you came from some other planet, and so you're not human yourself. So you're kind of curious about these humans. What goes on in their minds? So let's take one example. Another way of putting it is mirror your own mind. Or a further place, trace the radiance down to the source. And yesterday I spoke about various different ways you could do this, one of which would be focusing on the experience of hearing. And reaching deeply within yourself when you hear a sound. How do you know you're hearing a sound, for one thing? And who is it that's hearing a sound? Of course, none of these are verbalized. These are all part of the wordless search. And that is the important part of this process. It's a wordless search for the truth that cannot be expressed in words. There's a poem or a commentary on one of the koans in the Mumonkan Koan. It says, like a dream, like a mute trying to tell a dream, like the person who's unable to speak, trying to describe what they've been through, which in that particular case would be a kensho, an insight, and an awakening moment. We have to go beyond words. There's no way we can think ourselves into awakening. And this is the big challenge for most human beings. Some people have more familiarity with a different, deeper way of experiencing life, a more intuitive way of experiencing life. And that's a really good start, because we can't use words. There's no way to express this radiance, this numinous awareness that is our fundamental being. No wonder it was called God. Chinul also wrote or said, this mind subsumes all mundane and supramundane dharmas. That is phenomena. Now, I'm afraid that sentient beings are unaware that their own minds are numinous, sublime, and autonomous, and will end up seeking outside for the path. Once more, this mind, who we really are fundamentally. And it does involve words, and it does involve writing and speaking and sharing information and exploration, intellectual exploration and engineering and IT and all kinds of ways of moving about in life. But there is that deeper level. It's as if our conscious mind is just the part of the iceberg that is visible above the water. And there's a much higher proportion of awareness, perhaps is what we could say, that is under the radar, more subtle, less obvious, and all too often overridden. Small children have this ability to tune in. They don't need words. In fact, they don't usually have words until they're at least about 15 months old. And then they begin to grasp language. Before that, they're able to do fine without it. Of course, they are not able to speak in sentences, but that's a small part of our experience in life. Chinul is asking us, begging us not to seek through words, not to seek outside of ourselves, but to turn the radiance within and trace it down to the source. And yesterday I also mentioned that Rinzai, the great Chinese Chan master, spoke in this way: there's a true person of no rank. In other words, with no coloration, no description, no identity. There's a true person of no rank, coming in and out of the doors of the senses. And the doors of the senses are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the skin, the felt sense, and mind. So I'd like to share with you also today more from this book, Cultivating the Empty Field, The Silent Illumination of Hongzhi, Zen Master Hongzhi, who was Chinese and is famous for coining the term, whatever it was called in Chinese, I don't know, but it was translated as silent illumination, and which has become vastly misunderstood in modern days. It appears, in fact, back in the 1700s, when Hakuin was teaching, he was not having any good words for this term, silent illumination. He called it the cave of dead sitting, because despite the fact that it is considered a description of our true mind, silent and illuminating. He felt that it was not a practice that was going to amount to anything, that it would just encourage people to kind of hunker down into a pleasant mind state. And that's not what it's about, but it is what people could misunderstand it as pointing to. It's, you know, we human beings are so drawn to pleasure and rejecting pain or discomfort or unpleasant experiences. And so when we hit a pleasant mind state in our Zen practice, we're so tempted to stay there. But it's a really bad decision to make, to do that. Our experiences in our Zen practice are it's as if we're taking a magnifying glass to all that's going on in our mind, not to get involved in it, but to explore what's really going on. We have the mindless yada yada, that's the background noise that people feel very uncomfortable doing away with or not having present. We human beings have a challenge in that direction. Wasn't it Descartes that said, "I think, therefore I am"? Which means, of course, if I don't think, I don't exist. Well, guess what? We don't really exist anyway, in the form that most of us think that we are existing. So let me share some of the words of Hongzhi. All Buddhas and every ancestor, without exception, testify that they all arrive at this refuge where the three times, past, present, and future, cease and the 10,000 changes are silenced, not shut down. Straight ahead, unopposed by the smallest atom, the inherently illumined Buddha spirit subtly penetrates the original source. When recognized and realized exhaustively, this spirit shares itself and responds to situations. When we act from our self-conscious awareness, our conditioning, our assumptions about things, we don't respond, we react. Just recently, there was an official government meeting at the state level, I think. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was having to do with a number of issues being taken up by this board, including one of water quality. And one of the members of the board is a younger woman, I think she's still in her 30s, who is has a doctorate and is an expert in water quality. And when the subject of this potential investment, or what it was, it wasn't clear what it was. There was some issue that needed to be addressed, and she wanted to understandably share her technical knowledge, because this, whatever it was going to impact the area negatively. And a guy, it so happened that not only was she a woman, she was also Black, and probably Spanish Black, because her last name was Rosario. And there was a white guy on the board, and she introduced herself and gave her title, Dr. Rosario. And he kept trying to call her Mrs. Rosario. And then she corrected him. And then he said, well, and he used her first name. Thankfully, the board decided that there was no place for that kind of behavior on the board. And so he was exited from the board. He was no longer on the board. We all have our prejudices. Some of them are more conscious than others. And it's a normal human condition to have taken upon ourselves certain assumptions. We have conditioning based on our experience and where we grew up and how we grew up. And we react to life circumstances out of those assumptions. And that so often brings about pain and suffering. Whereas actually, who we really are is far beyond that. and to be able to respond out of that luminous transparency without any skewing of perceptions is to live an awakened life. And that is available to every single one of us. But there's a lot of work that has to be done to uncover it. And when we're talking about reaching a pleasant mind state in our zazen, that's kind of a warning sign, because what are we ignoring in order to reach that? Zazen, properly undertaken, brings us to become aware of where we are caught in our misunderstandings, in our prejudices, in our conditioning, in our lack of awareness of the real truth. And so up until a certain point in our practice, it can be not very comfortable. Most of us are not really happy to be confronted with where our behavior might be less than optimal. And so we usually try to deny it or shove it under the carpet. But in this case, in order to become free of it, which is the only way to truly be able to experience that luminous transparency, we have to open to it, feel it. Oh, yuck. And allow ourselves to own the experience and not reject it. And it's kind of amazing when that happens, when we are able to fully accept an insight into some not optimal behavior pattern and tune in to how it feels in our body and stay present with that feeling until it dissolves. It weakens that reactivity. It'll come up again a few more times. And if we continue to respond in that way, tuning in, accepting it, accepting the remorse that we recognize when we recognize that we've behaved in that way, then it literally weakens the synaptic connections in our brain so that we are less and less and less inclined to indulge in that dysfunctional habit pattern. And gradually they begin to be winnowed out. And then, of course, a more subtle level is become aware of, and we work with that in the same way. And gradually we become increasingly clear and more readily able to respond to circumstances rather than to react. And when we go deep enough and frequently enough and let go enough, then awakening suddenly takes place. And of course, that's not the end, but really much more of a beginning. As you've heard so many times, it's important that whatever we open to in awareness, we bring to life in our daily life, in how we behave, what we think, what we do, what we say. This is Zen practice. And so for however long it takes to reach that point, we are having, if we were working sincerely, we are having increasing awareness of our behavior. At a certain point, we get that in opening to these moments of awareness, that this is the road to freedom. And so we welcome them because we know that there's going to be more spaciousness in our life, more ease in our life, more joy in our life, greater ability to respond to circumstance rather than to react to them as we continue that process. This is all part of Zen practice. It's all essential in terms of coming to awakening. And I cannot imagine trying to stay blinded to my behavior after seeing how beneficial it can be to open to the full catastrophe and own it, experience it, feel the remorse, and with that remorse, wordlessly, without any other way of needing to put it into words, make a commitment to not behaving in that way anymore and to continuing on the road of opening further. So, when recognized and realized exhaustively, the spirit shares itself and responds to situations. The gates sparkle, and all beings behold the gleaming. How we behave begins to find resonance with people. Just as when Mitra-roshi, before he was a Roshi, in that encounter when he was a head monk at Shofukuji in Kobe, Japan, and was leading a work group outside the main gate of the temple, but still on the temple property, and was accosted by the violent homeless man who was demanding that something about the temple should be giving them more water, or whatever it was. It was unclear exactly what the story was, but the point was that this man was in a mind state that he was ready to take out anybody who put up any resistance. And Harada simply became inwardly more quiet, paying full attention to this man in a way that honored him, clearly not having preconceived notions about the situation or the man, but honestly honoring his humanity despite his behavior. And he became increasingly calm, and the homeless man began to tune into that and become increasingly calm himself. And in the end, the matter was settled amicably, and the man and his group went away. Such is the sparkling of the gates: eyes, ears, mouth, nose, the very being of a person who is let go enough to be able to respond. The gates sparkle and all beings behold the gleaming. Then they understand that from within this place, fulfilled self flows out. The hundreds of grass tips all around never are imposed as my causes and conditioning. The whole body from head to foot proceeds smoothly. He also said, silently dwelling in the self, in true suchness, abandon conditioning. Abandon. Don't try to shove it away. Don't try to deny it. Don't try to make it change. Abandon it by being fully present with the moment as it seems to be. Open-minded and bright without defilement, simply penetrate and drop off everything. Today is not your first arrival here. Since the ancient home before the empty kalpa, clearly nothing has been obscured. Although you're inherently spirited and splendid, still you must go ahead and enact it. When doing so, immediately display every atom without hiding a speck of dirt. Dry and cool in deep repose, profoundly understand If your rest is not satisfying and you yearn to go beyond birth and death, there can be no such place. Just burst through, and you will discern without thought dusts, pure without reasons for anxiety. Stepping back with open hands, in other words, giving up everything, which is a frightening thought for many people. Because if we give up everything, we can feel like, how are we going to survive? And yet, what is it that Jesus said? Look at the lilies of the field. Are they lacking in perfect arrangement? Immediately you can sparkle and respond to the world. Merge together with all things, everything, everywhere is just right. Accordingly, we are told that from an ancient to modern times, all dharmas that are, and that is phenomena, are not concealed, always apparent and exposed. There was one more that I wanted to share with you. Study the Buddha and research his lineage subtlety. You must clarify your heart, your mind, in the Chinese characters that are used in Japan and in China and in Korea. The character for mind and heart are the same when it's referring to this particular subject matter. So sometimes it's rendered as heart mind, sometimes it's rendered as heart. But in our Western context, we would take it as mind, which is far beyond anything we can attribute to our brain. Without pettiness or weaving hairs to create an obstacle, be magnanimous beyond appearances, splendid and lustrous like the waters moistening autumn, noble like the moon overwhelming the darkness. From the beginning, just beam through all gloom, profoundly free from stain. Constantly still and constantly glorious, the stillness is not extinguished by causes. The glory is not marred by shadows. Vacant, round, and pure, the empty kalpa will not shift, shake, or obscure the source. Able to be serene, able to know, here you can walk securely. The jade vessel turns over on its side, at once dispensing energy for you to return, share yourself, and respond to the world. In this realm are the separate, limited forms, but all are only what the self establishes, arising along with our own four elements. How could there be an obstruction? Since this mind is entirely without obstruction, there is no difference between that one and me. Self and other are not separated by their names. Sounds and colors crowd in together, carefree and transcendent, directly leaping into each other. So it is said that mountains and rivers are not separated. You should embody this like the brilliance apparent everywhere. Like the brilliance apparent everywhere. And it is an interesting experience when we have let go enough and put our full attention into perception, into awareness, that, as the saying in the Capping Phrase collection goes, even garbage glitters like gold. This is part of the motivation behind using the jihatsu bowls, the nested bowls, in our eating. It's one of the reasons behind it, because it can encourage awareness to be able to use the bowls absolutely silently requires attention and awareness. How much of the time do we put the bowl down with our minds elsewhere? And yet to train ourselves to pay attention can really support our practice. So I think that's enough for today. Just work on tracing down the radiance to its source over and over and over again, open to whatever might be experienced along the way, yet not looking for something in particular. Gradually, a source will be revealed. It can take a long time, but it will certainly be worth it. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.